Welcome to Unraveled, where we unpack the sermon one thread at a time.
All right, I want to begin today and talk to you guys and kind of inquire about your first job. Yesterday's sermon was all about honoring your boss, and so I want to take a step back in time, 20, 30, 40 years to your first job. And Daryl, why don't you start? Tell us about what that was like. What kind of worker were you? Were you the hardest guy in the building, or hardest working guy, or the slouch?
Yeah.
What would you say?
The very first job. Well, I guess I cut grass for, and that was sort of memorable in a way. For my grandmother's, a friend of hers, and she was very particular about her yard. And I remember, I'm probably 14 years old, and I remember the first time I got done cutting it, she said, "Young man, have you been drinking?" And I'm like, because the lines were all over the place, and I'm like, no. But no, maybe my first more real job, I worked at an orchard. We had to go through and prune like the fruit, and that was quite an interesting job too. I think I was 15 or 16, and it was me, and there was 15 Mexican guys that would work in this orchard, and we hopped on a truck and we would go out there, and they'd be speaking Spanish all day, and then there would be me, and but I only did that for a few weeks, and they were going to call us back, and I never got a call back. So I'm assuming I wasn't their ace employee. They didn't have a parking spot for me up front.
That's right.
So maybe not the best first experience.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. What would you say?
Well, I mentioned it last week that I worked for your grandpa. Actually, I worked for my grandpa, probably in junior high on the farm, and just moved rock piles and all kinds of stuff that was, fun manual labor. And then I got a job at Radio Shack, and I'm pretty sure your grandpa took a risk on hiring a high schooler. And I can't remember. I don't think they had too many younger people working for him back then. It was all, people that were at least out of high school.
Yeah.
And so I think he took a chance on me. And, I was really passionate about that. I love technology. I was really into it. So I think I tried hard, but your sermon struck a chord with me with the push-up analogy.
Yeah, sure.
I can think back to numerous times where I was holding my push-up stance, and not really, especially if he wasn't there on a Saturday morning or something. I certainly wasn't the model employee.
I resemble that remark.
Yeah.
For sure. And even my own dad or grandpa. That's my boss. But, that's good. I think it's rare to find a teenager who's going to be doing push-ups when nobody's looking. Kind of a deal. So the line about working hard when no one's looking, how do we keep our heart anchored when we're giving a lot of effort, but sometimes it gets unnoticed? So how does the motivation stay there? And I'm talking about in the workplace specifically. How do we keep, I don't know, anybody, what are you guys' perspective on that?
It's tough. I mean, even as like a business owner, as the boss, I don't necessarily have someone that I have to directly that holds me accountable. But even in that position, I feel really almost like a guilt or an obligation to my employees that I need to step up and always be working hard, because I don't, I want to model good behavior for them and work hard. And I just think it's, as long as you're praying and you have a right relationship with God and you put that perspective on it, that you're working for Him, and that even the times that it goes unnoticed, your heart's in the right place, and that's you just need to be modeling that behavior and working hard all the time.
Yeah, well, that's good. I thought back to my car sales days, and I mentioned yesterday we weren't hourly employees. If you didn't sell, you didn't make any money. So there was always the incentive to do what you could, but when it would get slow, it was very difficult because people weren't coming in. Sometimes it would be a combination of the season plus weather and things like that. And that's the bosses didn't really scrutinize us much, but when it would get slow, it's like, oh, there's people you can be calling. There's this, there's that, and just when it's busy and things are thumping, they were just, attaboy, how can I help you? But it was kind of always, those were always difficult. You're trying to get blood from a stone type of thing. And so that was, I think that can be difficult. yeah, you try to, I don't know, you try to work hard, but sometimes working hard isn't always, you got to work smart too, and there's a balance there probably.
Both of you have a work history of being an employee and now a boss. Yeah. And so like, how do we, does that perspective as an employee, a former employee to now being a leader, is that like, I don't want to be like I used to be, or I was a hard worker, so I expect that? How do you guys, reflect on that?
Oh yeah. It's tough as I go through my different jobs that I've had over the years. I've always been wired to just love to work. I think it's probably one of my faults too. I can give you lots of reasons why that, you can go overboard on that, sure. I guess is my point. And I think it gives really good perspective. I'm really thankful that I had all those opportunities to work for several different people, all the way from high school through college. I worked almost full time going to college, and then had several positions after that. And you work for different people. And I think I'm glad I always tell people that either when I'm hiring someone or I'm talking to someone young or that doesn't have a lot of work experience, it doesn't matter what you've done, but I've always looked at every one of my jobs as a stepping stone to learn something and build off of. Mm-hmm. And if you have that attitude, no position that you're ever in is beneath you or not good enough. And I know it's hard to, we talk about comparison and all that stuff, which, but I do think that if you have the right attitude in every season of life and every job, no matter where you're at, I don't want to say good things can come, but you make the best out of the situation, and hard work is often rewarded, and so I just think that's helped me get a good perspective and have the right attitude as I've progressed through my several different jobs and different careers. I've done different things too, kind of like you go from milking cows to here you are preaching, and I have done several different things too.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't. I think I don't know. I guess I grew up around a strong work ethic and seeing it. My father, he was a mailman for his whole life, but he had 5 kids, and my mom stayed at home, and so it was always he worked at a meat stand on the weekend. He would ref basketball, baseball, football games all the time. He was, and he enjoyed doing some of that stuff, but it was to provide for our family, and so I always saw him working hard. I never remember like ever him taking a sick day. In fact, he retired like 2.5 years early at the end because of that, except for he had a knee replaced, and that was the only time I ever remember him like never being home and I don't know, and that's kind of been maybe my mantra, and so probably doesn't make me the best boss, and so I don't say I try to hold everybody to that standard necessarily, but I just, I don't know. As long as you're getting your work done, I think it's that's what I see more than anything. I think I mentioned I haven't been an hourly employee too often, and to me that's what it comes down to. If you're, if you work hard and get your things done, you don't need to stand around to look at the clock type of thing. So. I don't know. I think it's maybe still a transition, especially as we have more people here, and but I'm thankful even for the deacons and helping give some oversight on, because I want to be able to preach and invest in people, and they can help with some of the management of leadership and even pastoral staff. So it's good to have a team helping. I think with that for sure.
You mentioned, and it's so true, that we spend more time at work with those people than we do with our family and our friends or whatever. So how do you, obviously in your world now, it's obviously a mission field, right? That's your job, but like you've also had secular jobs as well, and we all have. And so how do we take our faith into our workplace? How do we practically take that step? It could obviously be in conversation, but what else, what can listeners think about? How can I, this week, take the step towards taking my faith to the workforce?
I just think it's intentionality is where it's at. I think if our mind is thinking that way, and if we're praying that way, God will open up those avenues. Like God will open up those, you might be, I hope we're all praying for like one specific person that, specifically like, a neighbor or a friend or a coworker, because when you start thinking that way and praying for them, then that one day that they say something like, man, I had a tough weekend. And it's like, maybe it's an open door. Like you realize that's a God ordained appointment, not just a coincidence. And so I think when, the little book that was popular maybe 15 years ago, the Prayer of Jabez, kind of pray for that opportunity and see if God doesn't open the borders. I think when we do that, God opens up those. I know, at least in my experience in my life, like when I've prayed specifically for someone or something or a chance to share, God has opened those doors. And then there's other times you get busy and you're paying bills, you're doing whatever, you're scheduling vacation, people get sick, and our mind, we lose focus some of that, and God's not up there with a hammer ready to squash us, but sometimes we lose our compassion for people. And that's the importance, again, of being in church every Sunday, because we all need that reset. We all get in life and have stuff happen, and whether it's good stuff or even bad stuff, whatever it may be, it can distract us from the big picture. And so, getting there yesterday and, singing a new song, God's a great dance floor, and thinking about how good God is, and just, some of the testimonies we heard, and, even in your words yesterday was just so fitting. We need that, because if we're not in God's word, if we're not praying, if we're not in accountable relationships, and then we miss a Sunday or two, boy, it can be a slow fade away from God.
And the other, you're spot on, the being in prayer, to be mindful of when but I also think it's, if you're having a conversation at work with a coworker, if there's everyone goes through hurts, they've got, a family member or someone they know that maybe is going through sickness or a challenge. I always think if when you're talking to them, if they're in a moment where you would turn to God for comfort, I always think like, bing, that's the time. Or that's like one of those little, like, if I were in their shoes, what would I do? And, my comfort's in the Lord. So I would go in prayer and seek my comfort there. That's like another little sign that, this might be an opportunity to talk about my faith, or say, well, if I were in that situation, however it would be, and just being prepared for it. It's like sharing your faith. You've said this before. You have to. Some of us are good at thinking on our feet. I'm not. Like, this podcast is tough because I'm not, I need to prepare and stuff. But it's the same thing when it comes to sharing our faith in a workplace setting. Like, I'm not saying you have to rehearse, but you got to, be ready for it and think about it. And how would I do that? And it goes beyond the workplace, but that, and along with prayer, I think.
Even helps. You say rehearse, like when we just finished up a 101 class, and I tried to get a few of them to share their testimony, in front of 7 or 8 before we do it, like in the baptismal pool. And the more you do those types of things, like, how do I talk about my faith? Like, what was it that made me realize there's a God? Like, when you start to verbalize those things, it doesn't mean you're going to be a public speaker necessarily, but you see how God can use your story, and that's. My one Bible professor used to always say, we got too many undercover Secret Service Christians that never share their faith, and they'll flash a badge if they have to, but we got too many of those. We need more of the vocal ones, and the point is, we all need to be willing to do that.
We need to be a professional at sharing what God's done, and because it is evident in many cases. It's just, is it front of mind? Because again, I can name you the Chiefs starting lineup, but can I tell you my story? Things that whatever we're focusing on, we're going to put some brain power into it. Yeah. So how do we walk into the workplace and be bold in our faith without being pushy? Because some people are really introverted. It's real hard to even get the words out, but also you don't want to be pushy because that could be pushing away. So how do we walk the line of being open to share and bold, but not be pushy where you're feeling like, okay, I've heard enough of this. You go to your Christian corner over there, and I'm going to be with the guys around the water cooler. So what do you guys think in that area?
Yeah, I don't know. For me, I just think I think of a sports analogy, like great sports players, like basketball player, for instance. maybe averages 25 points a game, and some guys are like, I need to get shots off right at the beginning of the game. And the real pros, the Michael Jordans, the real, they let the game come to them. And I think when you live a life that shows that you have faith, I don't think you have to force it. I don't think you have to. I always say you don't have to be obnoxious. You have to be different. There was a video years ago. Rob Bell, he used to put. So I thought some quality stuff up years ago, and he seems to have drifted. But he had one video called Bullhorn Guy, and he was talking about, the obnoxious guy that stands on the street corner, has a bullhorn, and he's proclaiming, a fire and brimstone message. And his point was, and I think it was done well in the video, like that usually is not effective to most people. They're not going to be beat over the head with that. Now, the gospel message is confrontational. Jesus says you're lost. You can't go anywhere but hell, or anywhere but go to hell apart from me, unless you repent and receive, so there is a confrontational message certainly to it, but we don't need to be the confrontational mouthpiece. So again, that's where I just, I sold cars for all them years, and God didn't really have my heart. I wasn't sharing faith in the workplace really until the last probably year and a half or so. And then I started thinking about it more, and I would try to do it more. And sometimes I'd even try to do it with inviting them to a church service or inviting them to something. And sometimes it was usually no, but at least it allowed, to you have some sort of, so I'm not saying to be so sheltered in it, but also not like somebody sharing and you need Jesus, there has to be I think God will lead you, God will guide you. It's not our job to save them, it's our job to be faithful. And so the Holy Spirit will open up the door, I think, to conversations if we're willing to have ears to listen and kind of a heart to hear.
And I think that tying into the workplace again of measuring your ability or success towards others, and sometimes I'm a little inward look at myself. I love to obviously hold myself to a high standard, hold others to a high standard, and then also live for recognition. I don't know if it's just my personality, but words of affirmation is huge. Mm-hmm. And so, for my wife and those around me, that kind of thing. So how do we continue to work hard when maybe those words we're not getting noticed, we're not getting the affirmation, and that's more practically, less spiritually, but just the fact that you can set a standard in what working for God and doing things well, but also maybe going unnoticed. So Dayton, how do you walk that line?
I think it probably comes down to contentment.
Sure.
I mean, that's the word that pops in my head is, and I think we all struggle with the comparison, issue. That's probably contributed to some of my success in life, but at the same time has also contributed to being not content.
Great point.
Yeah, I mean, it's good and bad. I don't know of anyone that struggles with it as much as I do, and it's hard. It's easy to say, just be content with what you have. It's easy to say, be content if you don't feel recognized. It's easy to say that, but to actually have contentment in your heart is hard. It's something I struggle with all the time. And wanting those words of affirmation. I mean, you and I are wired similarly that way, and I think a lot of us are. And it doesn't change either. Again, I go back to being an employee to being a boss. You still, we're all sinful, pride-filled, sinners that seek affirmation from others and seek that positive reinforcement. And it doesn't, in fact, it might even get harder. Like you've mentioned, leadership is lonely, and that's true. It's rewarding, and it's lonely. So I don't know. I think it's just finding contentment in how God sees you, and not be so caught up in, and if you're not content, I always go back to why. Like, what am I looking for? What am I working for? Why am I not content? And if you really get deep on that, you realize, what am I doing?
Where do you find your worth?
Yeah, it's like, come on now. I need to readjust. So that's good.
That was a challenging part of that passage yesterday because, there's so many of us that are in the workplace that you might feel you're looked down upon a little bit, maybe because you're a Christian or whatever, and maybe you aren't noticed and you don't seem to get the opportunities or the promotions or the whatever, and it feels like, why am I banging my head against the wall? Why am I working so hard when it's obviously being unnoticed? And God again says, I notice, like your work ethic is important to me, and that, that's hard to keep front and center when you're in a place that you're marginalized, and so I don't know. I think to me that was really a part of that text that really kind of stuck with me, because I remember even my first job, kind of when I worked at Dairy Queen, I was just an employee, and it was like I wasn't like the popular, the cool kid it was all these cheerleaders that worked there, and it was the older guy that owned the place, and I was the only other guy that worked there at the time, and so there was all these girls and me, and like they were friendly with me, but like I just felt like, I don't know, like I wasn't part of it. But then like I would work hard, and my boss really took an interest in me, and like he saw me work hard, and then he started rewarding me with like better shifts, for instance. Like, I could work in the daytime, instead of every night. And then he had me start to do some closing. And so it was, but even there, like eventually I got noticed, but for the person that doesn't get noticed, boy, it's even harder. You feel like I'm doing this and this and this and this, and and they're expecting more, and and I'm sick and I'm here, and they don't even thank me, and all those types of things,
It goes back to that Colossians verse you shared, right? We're working hard and working for the Lord. And I love that at the end of your sermon, you talk the Mia Hamm quote. And I think it's so true. Take out Mia Hamm, put Michael Jordan, put anybody who's done something and accomplished greatness.
Yeah.
And I think it takes the inward like drive, because I can't rely on, if I just relied on recognition or people encouraging me, there wouldn't be enough, right? Yeah. And so ultimately it has to go back to, where do I find my worth? Is it in my wife's opinion of me, or is it in the Lord, or whoever, my boss's opinion of me, whatever, people's? We cannot, as much as the world says, it's all about the parades, it's all about the red carpets and all the things that you can get recognized for. But so I like to finish practically. So how can we take that even when nobody's looking mindset into the workplace? How do we serve well? How do we share our faith? Let's finish practically. Like, if you could advise somebody listening right now, what can we take to the workplace this week that can say, okay, starting tomorrow, I want to try to do this more, or I want to be able to take that step. So what do you guys think?
I think there's I think each job probably has different ways in which you're challenged with, acting in a Christ-like way. So you gave the example of, what was his name?
Booper.
Yeah. Booper. Okay. So like in that situation, it was like time theft. Yeah. It was like being lazy on the clock or whatever. Yeah. Booper. I love that. Yeah. So in that situation, that could have been the thing that most people were struggling with. I know in our industry, integrity is important, and doing the right thing and being honest. And I think there's obviously overlap and different things, but there's probably something in your workplace that is something that people are challenged with that you see in others. I mean, it's easy for us to see, the speck in our brother's eye. And so I'm sure there's something there that is a challenge. So it could be something like that. Like, I'm going to make a conscious effort to not do that, whatever that is. And I'm going to, what are some ways I can go above and beyond to have greater integrity, or to, not steal time, or whatever it is. So there could be things like that, maybe that are ways that you can start to demonstrate that you're different, and that you hold yourself to a different standard than others. And then maybe just going back to it may not be tomorrow that you get the opportunity to share your faith, but praying for someone that might be the most likely to have that opportunity, and then to be ready to, okay, well, how am I, they go to church, they don't go to church, and just plan ahead. I mean, most of life is just planning ahead a little bit. Yeah. And I know not everything can be planned ahead and all that, but I think those are maybe a couple things that, with some intentionality, and then always just be in prayer for it, because when you're praying on it and it's on your heart, then it's like you said earlier. Yeah. It'll start happening. Yeah. So,
yeah, I don't know. I think it's a tough one to flesh out, like Dayton said, there's different situations, but my mind goes back to the opening kind of when I talked about, 70% of the workforce in general is unhappy in their workplace. And I think if you're in that 70%, I think you can change and be a part of the 30 real quickly by just applying the principle that Paul talks about. Like, go in tomorrow and realize that your boss is still not going to recognize what you do, or he's still going to require you to do too much, or whatever it might be. But like when I go in Monday morning, I'm going in and I'm working for the Lord, and then try to think on that. Like, it's cool to know that you're pleasing God, and to think on that, how He blesses you, and even that Colossians 3 verses, that whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord. Like, when we change our mindset. It's kind of like as a homeowner, like I enjoy now like working on the yard and like edging, my driveway and stuff like that. But like, man, when I was Ryan's age, that was like, oh, good glory, pulling weeds was the worst thing in the world. And, but why do I like it now? It's the same work. And my knees don't bend as good to get down and work and all that. But now like I can see the benefit in it. I can take pride in, in having my place try to look good. When you do stuff for the right reasons, the right mentality, I think we can feel and sense the joy of the Lord in that. And that's where we'll switch from that 70% to the 30% and start to change that. Like, hey, I pleased the Lord today, and I did. It doesn't mean you were perfect. It doesn't mean you start small and seek it to grow, but really try to allow your mind to change, because that's what Scripture is all about. Hopefully our mind is changing all the time, because our heart is inherently wicked, and we see things my way and skewed my way, and your boss may not be treating you as bad as you think, and maybe on the other side of working hard as unto the Lord, you'll actually see that fulfilled someday. So I think when we make little steps towards faith, towards God, towards actually believing what His Word says, I think it can make a difference in how we live.
Well, that's good. Well, hopefully this was encouraging, maybe motivating, or like giving you a lift if you're the unnoticed person, or a motivation if you're the Facebook person for half your day. Or whatever. Like at the end of the day, hopefully there's something in here for everybody.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Unraveled.